All right, so this is a little video about vibe coding and my experience with it. Um, Vibe coding is a super new thing. It's only really existed for the past couple months. And so I get kind of frustrated with a lot of the stuff I see on Twitter or on YouTube where people are sort of telling you the right way to vibe code and you've got to do this and you need this setup. Because the field is just so new that I don't think that anyone can really be an expert in this right now. So I'm not going to try and tell you this is the right way to do it. I'm just going to sort of talk about my experiences with vibe coding and some of the things that have worked for me, some of the things that have gone okay, some of the things that haven't worked so well. And hopefully this will give you a better sense of what you can do and how you can make the most of these tools, these AI tools. So my tech stack is normally Django, and I usually build my apps with sort of just like a traditional Django backend, sometimes using a little bit of HTMX, but mostly just sort of standard Django templates. And what I would say is like for vibe coding, what I've found is that the Django stack is not as effective and as fast as a pure React stack, especially obviously on the front end. So for this project, I decided to try and build like a React app connected to a Django backend. And the first thing I did is I looked at V0, I looked at Bolt, I looked at Lovable, and I kind of built throwaway mockups of my project in those tools just to see what it could do. And honestly, it was super impressive what you could do with just like a single prompt. And then after I had that going, I had sort of a very specific architecture that I wanted to have in mind, and those tools don't, they're a little bit more opinionated about what architecture they want you to use. And so I decided to kind of take some of the lessons and experiences from those tools, and ultimately I ended up building the whole thing in Cursor with sort of my own custom prompts and tooling, essentially, I guess. I'm going to talk a little bit about how that went, some of the things I learned, uh, and just, I guess, kind of like my takeaways for other people who are trying to get into vibe coding. All right, so first a little demo of what I built. So this is my app. It's jobs.dev. You can go there right now. I will warn you, I built this in about 2 days, I would say, mostly full-time. I mean, I was doing a little bit of other stuff on the side. And it is basically, the idea is that it's going to be sort of like a two-sided marketplace for Django developers. So on one side, you've got the job board, and on the other side, you've got the developer directory. I didn't implement the developer directory yet. I've been focused on the job board, and you can go in to the job board. You can see, you get kind of like a nice loading thing there. You can see these jobs are here. I scraped these from various RSS feeds of Django jobs, and then I used OpenAI's structured data APIs to extract the meaningful fields and put them in my database. You can also see there's like, you can sort, you can filter, you can, if we want to find kind of the highest paying remote jobs, for example, we've got this one, cloud platform engineer here, and we can go over there and presumably apply for this thing. So yeah, I mean, it looks pretty good. It's pretty simple. This is using, on the front end, it's using ShadCN and Tailwind, which is what I would say is sort of the library of choice for vibe coding, because the AIs know it really well. It's got a lot of nice little components. And yeah, so let's get into how I made this thing and what I learned. All right, so this is this is kind of a a diagram so obvious that it maybe doesn't need to exist. The vibe coding cycle that I used it's honestly it's quite similar to sort of like a traditional project management cycle. Starting with like this kind of planning phase, and in the planning phase, the main things that I'm trying to do in the planning phase is one, just like set up the architecture and all the tooling and everything else in a way that I know it's going to build my app how I want it, and also specify what I'm building, whether it's the entire app whether it's a specific feature. And so this is a lot of just sort of writing, and you can use the AIs to write. You can also write yourself. You don't need to get too fancy with it. Although I think for me, the important part of here was just making sure that, especially in the very beginning, the groundwork was going to be working within the stack that I wanted it to be working in. After planning, there's implementation. And implementation is just, it's the part where you're just telling the AI, build this and build that and change this, and you're testing it and getting it to work. For me, in the implementation stage, I don't really look at the code at all. That's kind of part of the vibe coding aspect, is you just kind of let it run, let it do its thing. Every once in a while, if I notice something obvious, then I will sort of give it feedback. And obviously, if I'm building a UI, then I will sort of give it my opinions about the UI and ask it to change and stuff. But by and large, in the implementation stage, I just like wasn't looking at the code at all. And then after I sort of get to a breaking point, something that I'm happy with how it looks like it's working, then I move on to the review. And in the review stage, I actually look at the code. I kind of try to understand the code at least at a high level. I'm not going to go into like the ins and outs of like every React function call and stuff, but I'll kind of look and I'll say, oh, that looks like that should be refactored, or that part doesn't look like it's doing anything, and I'll use the AIs to basically clean up its own code. And so, yeah, I mean, I think when I was doing this project, I probably wrote, less than 10% of the code, by hand typing it out. I did have a lot of input in terms of, change this, refactor this, I want this function signature to look like this, and so on. And then you move on to the next feature and just go round and round until you've got your app. All right, so I'll talk a little bit about my planning phase first, and I'll try to kind of like go through maybe my like cursor history, and you can kind of even just kind of like show you what I did and what worked for me. We'll see how that works. So, right, so here's my project, and let's kind of like go all the way back to the beginning. And so like, basically I started out with an implementation plan, and I used Cursor to help me sort of flesh out this implementation plan. And you can see I did sort of specify some bits about the architecture and so forth. Ultimately, what it did is it kind of took my prompts, and I worked just in this implementation plan document for a while. And by the end, I had sort of like this project summary, which was sort of my high-level specification about what the project was doing. I had this architecture overview section with, I've got this Django REST backend. I actually switched to Ninja. I should update that. This front end using, a single-page application with React Invite using Tailwind and ShadCN. I, had some bits about how I'm doing all auth communication, and again, like, a lot of this stuff just kind of got written by the AI, and I didn't really like spend too much time thinking about it or looking at it. I wanted to make sure that these bits were really well understood, just the core pieces that it would be building on top of. But yeah, I mean, like, does your database really need to be specified here? Probably not. So once I had my sort of architecture, the AI kind of made this sort of like plan of like what to do. And this is what I did, which was sort of, I was building on top of SATS Pegasus, and so a lot of this stuff is actually already kind of done out of the box for me. But the one thing I did kind of do on top of this was set up my React front end and integrate ShadCN. And that was just sort of like following the docs, installing it, making sure that it had the latest stuff available, because, you can sort of tell the AIs like, go read this documentation page and run. But for stuff where it's like core infrastructure installation and so forth, I find it's easier to just sort of go through those steps as well. So I kind of got to this sort of like ShadCN hello world state, and then I was like, okay, cool, now we're gonna get going. After that, the first thing I decided to do was to just focus exclusively on the front end. And so I sort of made, again, this slightly more fleshed out specification of like there's going to be like two primary sections. There's going to be like a find jobs and a find talent, and then I kind of went down into this find jobs thing. And again, the AIs helped me write this, and then I sort of read through it and modified it a little bit. But basically, there's this jobs route, and there's going to be filtering and sorting, and that's kind of all the stuff that I was just showing you in the demo. And honestly, I didn't even get to here. So everything that ended up getting implemented was just sort of this main jobs page here. And again, this is just sort of like to iterate in words before diving into the actual implementation. Right, so after I had this kind of specification documents, then I basically just told the AI to, go ahead and build the front end. And so we can see that in this chat here, which I will make bigger and expand. Yeah, so I had some kind of silly conversations first, but then eventually I was just like, okay, let's implement a mock-up of the UI. I gave it some instructions about like using shadcn and adding how to add components and stuff. Silly stuff. I don't know if this helps, but like, make it look modern and beautiful. And then kind of importantly, I think for the data side, I was just like, just use a mock list of jobs. We'll swap it out for an API call eventually. And then, yeah, basically it ran off. It, you can see it installed some components that it needed. It like, wrote the mock data file. It wrote some components. It made a jobs list component. And then after that, we basically had like a long back and forth where I was just giving it sort of like, like I was an annoying project manager or something like that, or product manager, I should say, giving it sort of like, oh, make this look different and let's stack them on top and blah, blah, blah. And like, the AI is just like happily sort of like implementing my feedback. And anyway, so then we had this long back and forth where we, I gave it suggestions about what to do and it happily took them. And at the end of all that, and I think I had like, probably a couple chats on this, eventually I had a UI that I was reasonably happy with. And then I kind of switched from this iteration phase or the implementation phase into the review phase. And so what that looks like is like, you can see my pull request for the project here. And so, yeah, so you can see first, like I set up shadcn and then like, yeah, vab coded UI for jobs. And so what basically happened here is like, oh, and one thing I'll say is like, commit a lot. Like basically every time I got to some working state, I would just commit just in case, the AI sort of went nuts and changed things. But basically at some point I switched from implementing features and switched to like doing sort of like refactors and type checking and like some of this other stuff. And that all happened. Basically what I did was I like submitted a pull request and then I like looked at what the AI was, I finally looked at the code for the first time, honestly, in GitHub because, I'm used to reviewing code in GitHub. And then I could go through on a file by file level and say like, oh, that thing looks weird. Let me go check that out. And so forth. So after I did the, that UI, you can see like then I kind of repeated the same cycle. Well, first I did deployment just so I would have a demo there. Then I did the same thing with the backend. And again, very similar type of process. We could look at my backend chat. I don't know, it might be like Django Ninja screaming. Basically, the best place to look would be the implementation plan here. So, blah, blah, blah. Okay, backend. Yeah, so once again, I sort of like, I asked it to write the data models that would make the front end work, I think, and it sort of like came up with this stuff. Yeah, this is funny. It didn't actually use this implementation at all because I ended up deciding to try out Django Ninja instead. But yeah, basically, I mean, I asked it to write the models, and it came up with these models. And then, I kind of like refined them again over some time. I asked it to then write the serializers, and then I asked it to wire it up, and it did that. And, pretty soon after that, I had a backend. Right. So I think you can kind of get the idea of what the process is like. Basically, you sort of like, plan something, you iterate with the AI, you review it, you get it decent, and you try and, break off little bits at a time, tackle each one individually, glue them together. And yeah, I mean, it's been surprisingly effective, I would say, overall. So let me get to maybe some of my takeaways and some of the lessons learned that I would say so far from this process. Things that worked for me, I mean, so first off, I think that the two things sort of getting started that were really useful. One was just like setting up the project architecture exactly how I wanted, and like not having the AI like start my project, but just like get the hello world exactly how I knew that I wanted the code, the shape of the code, the pieces talking to each other, get that all working, and then let the AI take over building on top of that infrastructure. That helped a lot, and that was honestly that was the reason why I didn't use like Bolt or Cursor, or V0 or Lovable. It's just that they don't make it very they want you to like sort of just use whatever infrastructure they like, but I had a very specific architecture that I wanted to use. Two, maybe in terms of the planning stage, just like iterating in text for a while, writing a specification, writing what you want and how you want it to work, and just sort of like using the AIs even to just say like write a specification for a job board, and then iterating with that, changing what you want in text again before getting into the code. Three, the actual coding part itself, I found it was much more efficient to just not look at the code at all, just let the AI run wild, and check its work by just sort of like maybe you have tests, but mostly, I mean, especially in the UI thing, just kind of clicking around, changing the screen size, giving it feedback, telling it when something's broken, and so on. And then four is like also very important, is coming back to that review cycle, making sure that the AI hasn't gone off the rails. You don't have this like 10,000 line file that could have been split up into components that were reusable and stuff like that. So again, just like separating the part of the development cycle of just like get the thing working and then like go clean it up, and that separation is nice because it was easier for me to just kind of like use those two different parts of my brain in that way. Okay, so number 5, maybe I'll talk about rules files for a little bit. And so during that review stage, one of the things I found really useful was, instead of telling the AI what to do, I would update my rules file with like something I wanted the AI to do differently, and then tell it like read this rules file and then like go fix this. And so I'll maybe give a quick example of that. So like I have these Python guidelines in here for Cursor, and like in my apps in SaaS package list, like all Django models use this base model thing, which has these created at and updated at fields, and there's also like a base team model, and then like similarly, I don't know why I can't scroll to the bottom of that file, but like there's this the project's user model is like the specific thing, and I like having it imported directly so that my IDEs can autocomplete it and stuff rather than using like settings.auth user model. And so I would, like when I noticed that Cursor was writing my models without these guidelines, I just updated the guidelines, and then I would say like, hey, read my Python guidelines and like fix this. And that way those Python guidelines are up to date for future vibe codings, because one of the things that I'm doing while vibe coding the app is I'm also like iterating on my vibe coding setup, if that makes sense. All of these rules are an iterative documents, and anytime you update the rules, then you're presumably like you're making your life easier every time that type of situation is going to come up in the future. So that was one thing. Another thing that has been useful for rules is this like commands thing. And so again, like, Cursor has this agent mode where it can run commands, it can install stuff for you. it didn't realize I was using UV, so I had to kind of give it instructions like, oh, if you want to add a Python dependency, use UV add. Similarly, like if you want to add a shadcn component, use this like npx shadcn command. And then like when you put this in here, you're like, hey, add this component and do it. Remember, and then you just mention this like at commands file, and it will then it will know exactly how to do that, and it will run those commands for you. So that's another useful rules file. And I would say those are the two main sort of takeaways in terms of rules files that I found. Is just like commands, and then like when there's like a consistent cleanup type of thing you want to do, just like document that in the rules file, and then you have it there moving forwards. Let's see, what else? One thing I didn't talk too much about is models. And honestly, like, it got to the point. So I mostly shifted between Gemini 2.5 and Claude 3.7, and they were both really good. I found that Gemini was faster, and so it was easy to like stay in flow state using Gemini, and it was pretty good. Claude was probably better overall, but it was just a little bit slower and a little bit more finicky, and then Claude also sometimes just like goes off the rails and does a bunch of stuff you don't want it to do. Claude seemed better at React UIs, and Gemini sort of like seemed to leave a lot of unnecessary comments in my code, which I found kind of annoying. But overall, I mean, like, I don't really think there's that much of a difference between these things. Just like try them all. I was kind of just like switching freely. I often didn't even know which model I had used. It was just, I would just set it and just use that one for a while. And then like, if Gemini didn't build something well, then I would like try again with Claude and see if that works. But yeah, I mean, I think just like, I don't know. I think the models are already kind of getting commoditized at this point. They're all really good. Yeah, I don't know. I think that's probably all I have to say at this point. Certainly is an interesting time to be a software developer. It's all this stuff is changing so fast. I think for a long time I was a little bit resistant to like, AIs aren't good, AIs aren't going to come, they're not going to, ever be better than people. I'm now at the point where it's like, oh no, like these, like I better be using this stuff, or someone's going to be shipping stuff 10 times faster than me. And I'm still looking at every line of code in my app. I am not, especially on the front end, and especially for these sort of like low stakes projects, I'm no longer sort of like understanding every line of code. But yeah, I mean, it's incredible what you can get built in a short amount of time now. So yeah, those are my thoughts. This was definitely a meandering video. I will put it up, see if it's useful. But yeah, I don't know. Let me know if you have any feedback, and I will catch you next time.